the more they cluster, the more they hear about calling the health department, since we've gotten our name out very, very heavily. I will have those numbers to you next meeting, our big annual report meeting. And then we took delivery of our new vehicle last month. So we now have our newest inspection vehicle, a Ford Ranger, that Artel is driving around. You'll see that one. And then other than that, other than the housing, it's been kind of a quiet summer. It's been good. It's been busy. It's been very fast, but it wasn't as stressful as some of the last few. So we seem to have gotten some of this down to a science. Knock on wood. Hopefully this goes into next year as well. But as of right now, that's really it. So.
Review of the minutes. Did anybody have any additions or changes?
I had moved for approval.
I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, loan request, 34 Friendship.
Yes, this is a pretty straightforward loan request. It's for somebody to connect to the sewer that's available. It's a septic abandonment. They're not asking for the full price. They're covering most of it on their own. So this one is a straightforward, relatively low loan.
And
We recommend approval.
yeah, we're all, how's our money for all that stuff?
The money is doing well. We're already moving into the second million of the second 2 million vote. So I've been talking to our finance director about putting on another article for town meeting so that we can approve another 2 millions ahead of time in case we run out of money. The word is out that this is coming, and especially with the new projects through Bayberry, Tashima, McLean, all the loan applications are starting to come in.
Roberta, how many applications do we usually get in a year?
Usually we would only get around 20 to 30. We have already gotten 20 or 30. We're closer to the 30 mark now in this year.
Okay.
By the time we hit December, we're probably going to be done. Probably going to be into the 50s. It has accelerated mainly because of the sewer connections.
Right.
Usually it was just from the IA upgrades, things like that. But because of the sewer connections, they have accelerated. They're smaller loans than an IA. IAs usually go around 70, 80 or so. These are around 20 to 30. The one from today is 12. So they're a little bit smaller, so we can fund more of them, but they're coming in more frequently now. I can have Ann run some numbers compared in each year. We have them.
Yeah, no,
We have
and
the
like you
numbers.
said, I think, so will ones like Meadowview
Yeah.
and Shimo, those will be seeing soon.
We're going to be seeing those
Okay.
really soon.
Okay.
We're already seeing some, but we're going to be seeing once the Shimo project comes online, we're going to see a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's online.
Yeah,
You'll see a lot this fall.
this coming fall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I get a motion to approve the loan?
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Release of the loan at 113 Walwinnett.
Yep. This was a loan that we issued already. The Ames, the 113 Walwinnett Road, they've installed their IA. They have their certificate of compliance. Their operation and maintenance agreement is active. So we're just releasing it at this point because it's in repayment. No objection.
I get a motion to approve.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Another release of ACO, 20 Meadowview.
So in this case, it was an ACO. It was kind of that savings account with the town. They've connected to municipal sewer, so it's time for us to release that money back to them. It was kind of like a small escrow account. Same thing, no objection. Work is completed.
Great. Motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, number of Lymes and communicable diseases.
Okay, so Lyme. I had the well report open. My apologies. Okay, so in the packet, we had a small infectious disease report for the past 10 years that our intern has worked on, our intern from Syracuse University. Grace couldn't be here. Her last day was last week. She had to go back to school. But she's been working on collating all of the information from the last year, for the last 10 years in all the infections. This is all through MAVEN, our virtual epidemiologic network. One of the things that was very interesting to come out is that of all the reportable diseases, there are about 82 reportable diseases, 71% of them are Lyme. 17% is Babesia. So safe to say that with that 88% being tick-borne illness, that is definitely our biggest issue. We've been working with our outreach coordinator. She developed a new flyer for tick-borne illnesses that went out in the town manager's newsletter last week, and that's been pushed out to anyone who subscribes to the town manager's newsletter, as well as the Steamship Authority, the High Line, and the airport. We're going to print out a few copies of those and deliver them to those 3 locations, and they can put it up for people to get. What you'll see is in the last 10 years, we had a spike in Lyme disease. It's actually on page 4 of the infectious disease report. You'll see that we had a spike of Lyme in 2013, very similar to the report I gave previously. And we're still in a decline, still in a Lyme valley, as to say. We're in the lowest we've been in 10 years. Which is really good news. We attribute a lot of that to national attention being placed on this. A lot of our education has been effective here. There has been a lot of information out about permethrin and how effective that is in dealing with tick-borne illnesses, but also with the genetically altered mice program that's coming to Nantucket, and a lot of the national attention that has gotten. People's ears perk up when they hear Nantucket, considering, especially if they're going to be coming. So they start researching it a little bit more. So that's an unintended consequence, good consequence, but an unintended consequence of the MIT project. The word is out on how to look for ticks, how to look for Lyme, how permethrin is really effective in preventing Lyme on your body, and ticks on your body. So that number we're hoping to keep dropping. The chart that you see on page 4 is what we call a standardized incidence ratio. It's per 100,000 people. So in that sort of an issue, when we look at the population of Nantucket, our population is relatively low. So when you're looking at an SIR per 100,000 of people, and if we look at our population of 10,000, for every 1 case, that would count as 10 in an SIR calculation. So even though our actual incidence numbers are low, the SIR is still really high. We are still shooting out there as 500 cases per 100,000. That's just because a single case counts for so much on Nantucket. So the lower we drop, the lower those numbers drop, the more of an overall effect it'll have on that chart. Do you have any questions on that chart right now? Or?
Are we comfortable it's not lack of reporting?
We are comfortable with that, especially this year as the hospital group, the doctors group has consolidated. They have consolidated, so now they have a dedicated person who is putting in information into MAVEN. So as they get it, somebody's putting it in. So everyone who is part of that hospital group, that if you have your primary care as part of the Nantucket Cottage Hospital, that number is getting in there. If you're one of the independent doctors, one of the doctors that are not affiliated with the hospital group, one of the doctors is really good at reporting, is really good at reporting it. We can't be certain about the other 2. But as far as the Nantucket Cottage Hospital numbers, we are fairly certain that that's accurate.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go
I just was going to ask if you, I think at one point you had mentioned that it tends to go in these peaks and
These valleys, yeah.
valleys, thank you. Are you anticipating that we're going to continue to drop with the education, or?
We are at a pretty low point right now, hoping to plateau it there and keep it down through education, through information out there. One of the things that we have spoken with our representative. It's not going to be in this session, but maybe a later session about getting local control on pesticides and herbicides for ourselves, to get local control on that so that we can look into treatment, and also the hunting. Because if we can get a waiver of some sort in order to allow rifle hunting on the island for deer, there is a donor willing to put up the funding to do you can't ever be 100% certain that you've eradicated the deer, but you can bring that number significantly down, which the deer is the bio amplifier for Lyme.
On the vineyard, I know they've done a venison distribution program. Is that something that if we are going to be culling or hunting for more deer, that we would be able to?
We have a
consider?
venison donation program. At every tagging station, we provide information to all the hunters that if they bag more deer that they're willing to bag, or if they want to keep hunting, since there is no bag limit on Nantucket, they can donate all of that. And we have Dylan Wallace actually does the butchering for us, and he donates that. All that goes to the food pantry.
So there's nothing Board of Health related that would be restricting it if there was more hunting?
There is no restriction from the Board of Health.
Okay.
We've already permitted the butchering and
Great.
the distribution of that. I think
Malcolm, I interrupted you. I don't know if you had.
No.
Sorry if I.
No, I was just wondering at what point don't we need genetic noise?
Yeah, actually, thank you.
It's such an interesting situation. That number keeps dropping. The more that number drops, the less we need the genetically altered mice. So it's a balance. Kevin has downright said, I think he's going to be giving a talk sometime this week about it.
So he's going to be here at the 31st?
On the 31st, so next week, next Saturday.
It's a Saturday.
Yeah, next Saturday. I thought it was this Saturday at the Culinary Institute at noon. One of the things he has said is, if you get to a point where this has been taken care of, or if a vaccine is out, or if there for any reason it's no longer necessary, he can stop his project. So it's a delicate balance on when we would be willing to call it off, or if we want to continue. Kevin says, as an evolutionary biologist, he's worried about the ethics of this, of the bioethics. That's why he wants the community involved as much as possible. And that's why he has a bioethicist, Ruth Faden from Johns Hopkins. She's on the Martha's Vineyard side on their advisory committee, and she's looking into the bioethics of this as well as part of her review. And that's the big question. At what point do we no longer need it?
Well, it would certainly be a lot harder to sell at town meeting, say in 2019, 19, 20 than in 2013.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
I think that would be a topic because it was at 2025 that they were anticipating possibly implementing. I think it would be a good
Yes.
topic to have on our agenda somewhat regularly before then. I
Absolutely.
did speak to a colleague who went to an international conference on biodiversity, I think in Switzerland, and
Mhm.
Nantucket was the topic of the conference, and there's a lot of international concern about the project and what it would mean, where the funding is coming from and the ethics behind it. So my concern based on the conversation I had with her is just that if we don't have the conversation in the meantime, 2025 rolls around and everyone loves the project and we
It
sort of
just
get blindsided into, isn't this a great idea? So I think having it at some point as a somewhat regular agenda item that we get updated on where things are at would be good.
Absolutely.
Would be good.
And I'd be interested to connect with that
Yeah,
colleague as
I can
well.
give you their contact. Yep.
And there's someone sent me a draft, that draft paper.
University of Ohio,
University
yes.
of Ohio. I can't show it to you because it's not published.
Yeah, it's in draft.
Some interesting evolutionary concerns in that paper.
I look forward to it being published.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's very
It-
interesting.
there's a lot of interest both from an ethical standpoint and from an evolutionary standpoint in this. One of the primary reasons he wants to test it on an uninhabited island first is to make sure he doesn't affect, there's no cross-species issues. If there is, it halts the study,
Right.
and it won't go past through that. It's one of his stops. The moment he finds a cross-species issue, he wants to stop it. He's looking, it sounds like it's easier to stop this study than it is to keep it going.
Right.
So it's a good thing to
That
keep
is
it
good
up,
to know.
keep us all to.
Yeah.
He's fortunately is quite willing to stop, and he understands the need for public support.
Right.
Mhm.
So he's not he's not a crazy
Yeah.
scientist.
Yeah.
Pushing it through for the sake of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's good. And I think having those updates will help us
Yeah.
stay informed.
Yeah. Yeah, he's trying to prevent the idea of the Jurassic mice situation. He's trying to avoid that. So, but in general, as far as the infectious diseases go, we are seeing 88% of all of our infectious reportable illnesses are tick-borne. So it's just something we have to keep getting our eyes on. We do have, our next illness down from tick-borne is hepatitis C. However, we are still significantly lower than the state. So even though it is in our top 3, it is nowhere near. It's almost half of what the state's incidence rate is. And then the next ones, anaplasma is the same way. Anaplasma is even almost 1/3 of, or even less, 1/5 of what the state is. And that's all in the report, and it's all in the packet. And then our number 5 is influenza, which we have seen in an uptick. It is still less than the rest of the state. We do still have high vaccination rates here. It's just every once in a while the formulation of the vaccine is a little off. So there are breakthrough cases of influenza. That happened last year across the board. Just the vaccine that was out wasn't 100% effective. So we saw the same uptick here, proportional to the rest of the state. And that's really about it on this one. We're looking pretty good on the Campylobacter issue, which is a opportunistic illness that usually comes in with through the hospital. We're seeing some of it, but also directly proportional to that of the state. It's a illness that has actually been going up in the state, but it has stayed stagnant for us. So the protocols that our hospital has and our inspections have, because it is foodborne, but it is opportunistic as well. We're keeping it at a baseline, even though the numbers are going up across the country, which is good news for us. It shows that our work is coming through. And that's about it.
Can I just ask, the Giardia, that has odd spikes, and what's that from?
So Giardia is it's a stomach parasite that we end up. It's pretty rare. So if you look at the chart, it's also one of those that's based per 100,000 of the population. So one counts for a lot. One case that we see here counts for a lot more.
Right.
So
I
you'll
see.
see the
Okay.
spikes.
I see.
You'll see it spike up. So what happened in 2017 was that we actually saw a couple more cases than normal. So it shows up as a large spike.
Okay.
But it's a relic of the number on how statistics work.
You usually see it in campers and hikers.
Yeah.
The ones
Yeah,
that are
it's-
prone to it because they drink out of
It's rivers.
Yeah.
rivers and ponds.
Mhm.
That's why I was surprised to see it here.
And we had a couple ponds.
Couple.
That's possible.
Well, so that's a good PSA. Do not drink the water from Hummock Pond and Long Pond and Maya Comment, especially in the hot months. And it's the same thing you'll see with the salmonella chart. Every one case counts for so much, so you'll see it spiking. We have such a low population number here that when we extrapolate that to a large scale, it
Yeah.
comes up to much bigger than it actually
Bigger,
is.
yeah.
Are there statistical variations for a changing population?
Not
Do
so.
we really swing?
We really swing, and that's actually the problem. You'll see if you look at some of the charts, most of the time the spike that you see, with Giardia is actually a good one. You'll see the spike happen in July and August. It's people who may have already picked it up and didn't start showing symptoms until they got here to the island. And then they do the sample here. It gets confirmed here. We own that number. It's just unfortunately a relic of how Maven works for us. Even if they're from New York, Hudson Valley, anything like that, we will still get that number if it gets diagnosed here.
So we're sending our Lyme numbers.
It goes both ways. If they end up with a tick bite here and they don't start showing symptoms until a week after they've been home, we won't see that number. So our tick numbers might actually be underreported for that matter.
But if they, it happens a lot. You hear that they go back home.
Yep.
And where have you been? Oh, they
You-
were in Nantucket.
Yeah.
Should
Yeah.
get kicked back. Wherever they're
It
at.
should.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. The issue is Massachusetts has its own reporting, its own 82 reporting illnesses, and they use Maven. There is no national reporting database. So I know like the state of Florida has a really strong centralized database. Very rare that we'll get an email from the state of Florida saying this person. I say rare because it has happened. I have gotten a phone call saying so-and-so was in your, this was when I worked in Framingham, so-and-so claimed that they ate here, they're coming positive with this, which is they ended up with a parasite from eating sushi from non-sushi grade fish. It happens a lot, actually. So the state of Florida called me to report that to me so that I can do a follow-up inspection. It's very rare that it happens because that's only happened to me once in 10 years that I've been working in public health. But they have their own centralized database. California has its own. We have our own. None of them communicate with each other. There is no centralized national database. It really should be, but they're just like there's the cancer registry, very good. The Veterans Administration database, it's very good. Infectious disease databases, it's none. It's working in a black hole. So it's odd. It's really odd. We're really strong with reporting chronic disease, not strong with reporting infectious disease. The death data is perhaps some of the best data you can get in the country. But even then, with the non-standardized coroner's reports across the country, like here in Massachusetts, you have to go to a medical examiner, which is an MD. In Arkansas, you don't. They're not an MD. It can be the sheriff who's doing a medical exam, an autopsy. So whatever goes on that death report, we still get that information. So if they died from salmonella, if they report that it died from salmonella, we'll get that information that the person died of salmonella. But it may not be accurate from some of these other states. It's very good reporting, not the best accuracy. It's really tough across the entire country. We're not standardized in many ways. So,
Any other questions, Jim? Good. Okay, thanks. Marijuana regulations.
Yes. The CAC has been asked by the select board to comment on these regulations, so this advisory board asked the Board of Health to comment on the regulations to the CAC. So before they pass on the comments, does anyone have any comments?
I didn't.
I mean, my only comment is there, we're mentioned here, in evaluation criteria for a license, it says that they have to have permits and conditions for health codes, but it's kind of nebulous, it's not clear if they have to stick with it, and I just assume they do.
If there's a regulation in place, they always have to stick with it.
So,
The only issue we would find with some of this is the Cannabis Control Commission has been explicit in saying cannabis-infused products are not food, so they don't fall. So they don't fall under the food code.
I'm sorry, that's crazy.
We agree. We agree. Luckily, the only retail establishment that we have so far has agreed to pull food permits and be subject to regular food inspections. They're really amenable, and the current the second applicant has also been amenable of doing a commercial kitchen, doing the same thing. But technically, they're not required to.
I mean, some of our inns can't serve
Mm-hmm.
biscuits or something.
Yeah.
Because they don't have so you
Agreed.
can't serve a biscuit, but you can serve
A marijuana brownie.
Roberto, was that something that you had requested specifically, or was it should it be in the HCA?
We actually spoke with the applicants at the time of their application when they were meeting with the staff originally. I did specifically request to do food for them to do a commercial kitchen, and they said they were going to do it anyway.
Okay.
They agreed.
That's good.
They agreed, and so did the second. The two applicants for the second license, both of them agreed as well.
Might be something that's good to sort of memorialize as an ongoing part of an HCA or something like that.
That would be a good idea.
I don't know how many more there will be, but that sounds like an ideal.
It's a great idea to get it permitted through us as well, regardless of whether the Cannabis Control Commission considers it food or not. People are still ingesting it, and it should be created with best practices, and that includes testing. I honestly believe that if they're going to be, the Cannabis Control Commission requires them to do some level of testing because they have to provide the proof of the concentration of the product that's in there. If they're going to label it as a 14% solution, it has to be a 14% solution by law, in part as an ingredient. Let's say CBD or THC. Right now, they're allowed to do their own testing, which is totally fine. But there's no quality assurance and quality control aspect that goes with that. There's no LIMS, which is a laboratory information management system that goes with that. So we have to take it on, the best way to say it, we have to take it on faith that what they're reporting is what's actually coming out. So I would love to see a stronger testing component where we can actually request those reports, or at least that they just report it to us on a monthly basis, so we don't have to request it.
The off-island testing centers, the LIMS, that's something that they would have, so that's just because we've got separate testing procedures.
It's because we have that variance for being an island.
The variance, I mean, I have great concerns about this whole testing issue. And, I have to think through it and figure out what we can do. I know the present establishments are being very cooperative, and that's terrific, but there's still always a public health issue.
And on the off chance, again, just that one of those closes and there's new applicants who aren't as agreeable, I think some of these things, like the commercial kitchen, perhaps like additional testing procedures, should be part of something, whether it's the host community agreement or somewhere where they've signed and agreed.
Yeah, because we talked about this, we were talking about the water quality lab. We have qualified, trained people who do testing, not somebody that just reads the manual.
Right. Yeah.
And then there needs to be controls, which
So-
is not
yeah.
included here.
Is that something the advisory committee is going to look at?
It would be, it's something I'm gonna have it.
Great.
Look at. I don't have all my information facts together to make a big deal about this yet. I'm just telling you all, it's, once I get my act together, we have to really seriously look at this.
Yeah.
There are so many different ways to look at it, and that's one of the issue. We have standardized protocols that we've worked when you worked in your labs, when I've worked in a lab. There are standardized protocols all out there. There are workarounds to get to the same issue, but you still need that standardization. One of the ones that we were talking about earlier, Malcolm and I were talking about, is the difference between high pressure liquid chromatography and gas chromatography. You can still get very similar information from the two different types. One requires a little bit more expertise than the other. One requires a certification over the other. They're both standardized measures. They're both, if you use the two together, it's a gold standard. One each independent, it's not a gold standard because you can get false positives and false negatives, especially if the people doing the work are not trained or certified in how to do it. There is each company that makes their equipment differently. So it's like the difference between the certification of a Septitech and Microfast versus the Rock systems and things like that, because they all require specific trainings because they're proprietary methods. So that's just part of the greater conversation on this.
And really what should be happening is that it should be a third party doing this testing.
It should be a third party auditor.
And that maybe as this gets established is something that happens down the line.
Yes. The best thing that can happen is a decriminalization from at a national level, so that it can get to transport it.
I mean, food companies essentially do their own testing, but it's certified, it's regulated, it's inspected by the government. So
Right.
I would be comfortable if they did their own testing, if it was done by protocol standardization and it had some kind of external review. not
Agreed.
necessarily the testing. So I guess what we're saying is we have no comments on this, so I would say to the committee, we have no comments.
For now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I skipped one.
Yeah, the wells.
Yeah, so we'll go to that, the well regulations update.
Yes. So approximately 2 years ago, we passed the well regulation. I believe it was regulation 78. Regulation 78. Since then, we've been collecting information and just putting it into our spreadsheet and separating it out by watershed. One of the things that was brought to our attention earlier was Tom Nevers is really kind of its own area on the island, which isn't affected by some of the other areas that aren't in watersheds. So I'm going to try to tease out and make an appendix on this to add a Tom Nevers as its own one-pager. We have 86 well tests from Tom Nevers, so it is a pretty good representative sample from that area. So I'll be able to tease that out so that we can get that information out, and I'll email that out as part of an update to this packet. But ahead of time, one of the things we've been looking into is seeing how we fare from the rest of the on the rest of the islands, how things go. We had five well tests in the Pippin's Way area, 21 in Quidnet, 10 in Warren's Landing. It was 85 in Tom Nevers, not 86. 13 in Squam, 44 in Hummock Pond, 52 in Nantucket, 39 in the Great Harbor watershed, and 110 in all the other areas that are not considered part of the watersheds. And what we've really been finding out is we are not in bad shape by any means, but we do have a significant amount of exceedances in every single one of the parameters, all of which, though, can be rectified with a filtration system. So what you'll see in the first section, you'll see in the sodium areas, Nantucket, about 75% of all the well tests in Nantucket came back with a little too much salt in their water. It's not terrible when it's past 20 milligrams per liter. It's more of a just it's there, just so you keep an eye that it's there. If it's past that 20 milligrams and you're on a low sodium diet, you might want to talk to a doctor about it or get a filter put in. You don't start feeling the aesthetic changes to water, taste. You won't start feeling, the water won't start feeling tasting salty, until about 100 milligrams per liter. And that's when you'll start feeling that grittiness. So right now it's mostly aesthetic, and it's just for the people who have that sort of a low sodium diet. All of the sodium issues, though, can be rectified with a carbon filtration system or even a reverse osmosis. Now, reverse osmosis isn't as effective as the carbon in removing salt, but it does remove a significant portion of it. And that's the sodium one is purely voluntary. Same with pH. What we're finding is that also in Nantucket has a pH exceedance. What we're calling a pH exceedance is less than a pH of less than 6.5 or more than 8.5. Neutral water is 7.0. Sorry. When you start seeing pH below 6.5 is when you start seeing leaching, metal. The acids start eating away at copper piping, lead piping, things like that. If you have lead pipes in your water in your house, you might want to look for lead as well if you have a pH lower than 6.5. If you have pH higher than 8.5, you won't be seeing that copper or any of that the metal scaling issues, metal leaching issues, but you can be seeing scaling. Scaling is when you start getting the hard water where you get grittiness on your soap and things like that. You'll start seeing some of that. So your pipes can get a little brittle. You'll get that. It looks like a clogged artery in a way on the inside of a pipe. You'll get those deposits. Once again, mostly aesthetic. Anyone who has a pH of 5.5 or less, we have connected with them because they need to get like a coal ash filter to raise that pH. Once the pH is below 5.5, that's when you might start seeing health issues. On top of that, that was exceedingly rare. I think only 2 had a pH exceedance of that extreme. With nitrate, we're calling nitrate exceedances. The maximum contaminant level for nitrate is 10 milligrams per liter. Same thing, you're seeing a lot of it in Nantucket, but you're also seeing a lot in Nantucket Harbor. When I say a lot, though, overall, there were only about 8% of all the wells that we have tested exceeded nitrogen. 10 milligrams per liter is the clinically significant level, is what the state calls it. So at around 10 milligrams per liter, a pregnant person will start seeing teratogenic effects on the fetus, cleft palate, things like that. Anything above, if you start going above 10, 15 to 20, you will start seeing neural tube defects in the developing fetus. So it's nitrate is something we really keep an eye on. Nitrate is also removed through a carbon filter. We were happy to see that the exceedances weren't extremely high in nitrate. We expected that number to be higher, but still 8% is very close to 1 in 10. It's around 1 in 12 or so. 1 in 12, 1 in 13 wells came back positive for a nitrate exceedance.
Were you surprised to see none in Hummock Pond?
Very surprised to see none in Hummock. One of the things about that is possibly because we don't have a big representative sample in Hummock Pond. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to push information out to them. Mm-hmm. Right now, our intern who worked on this and us and I are working into developing a letter that we're going to send out to caretaking companies to get well tests as well as they do their septic tests at the same time. Mr. Cooper is also already working on that himself, so we appreciate that. It was very surprising to see that. We've had a good amount of IA systems put in that area, but I was surprised. The other areas where it would have been a more of a, how do I explain, concern, the areas that are closer to Hummock Pond itself, have town water. There's town water on Hummock Pond Road. So we wouldn't be getting samples from them, which is probably where we would see a lot of more exceedances, because that's where the water is migrating that way and concentrating in that direction. So it's good that we have town water there. But I was surprised to see none in Hummock Pond. With copper, same thing. The copper exceedances that we're seeing at 1.3 milligrams per liter, mostly at that level is when you start seeing the aesthetic problems, where you start getting the green staining on your tub, on white clothing, things like that. That's, once again, easily treatable with a carbon filtration system, something like a Culligan system, things like that. Once copper gets approximately 2 milligrams per liter, a little bit more, which is about double, that's when you start hitting this clinically significant issues, where you start seeing gastric problems, people with gastric distress. We did not see anyone that high. We did not see a single well that high, which is really good news. This one is closely tied to pH. If the pH is too low, you'll see more copper ions in your water. The coliform issues that we've been seeing is, I think if I know, Rita, I think you were at the select board meeting when I mentioned about the coliform. The coliform, you'll see a lot of things come back positive. Most of the time, that first test comes back positive is sampler error. They touched the bottle to the water, to the hose or something like that, and they accidentally contaminated the bottle. That bottle the laboratory will send them a retest bottle with new instructions on how to do it. And if that comes back positive as well, then it gets a confirmed coliform. That's what you see here. These are just the confirmed numbers. These are not the false positive. This does not include the false positives. So what we're seeing here is every time there's some work being done on the pipes, things like that, usually there's a contamination. You have to flush your piping. One of the things I mentioned at the select board meeting was when there's somebody who works on the hot water tank, and you open up the hot water tank, get some work, maybe the heating element gets replaced. A lot of times the moment you open that and the basement air and things like that come into the hot water tank, it contaminates the tank. You're supposed to flush it. So almost every plumber I've ever worked with gives you those instructions. They tell you, plumbers know what they're doing. It's the handyman, the handy person who does their own home repairs, things like that. That's when you start seeing these sorts of problems. That's when you start seeing the coliform contaminating the well altogether. Where it's there'll be a landscaper, or you're mowing your own lawn, you accidentally hit the well cap, you cracked it, and you do the sealing, you seal it with your own epoxy, and then you never could decontaminate the well. So then the well comes back with coliform positive. That's usually what happens. It's very rare that a professional has worked on it and then left it contaminated. I got that complaint after mentioning it at the select board, and I wanted to make sure I cleared that up here. It's not the plumber who is leaving your area contaminated. That's very rare, because they do the due diligence to make sure they flush the system. But it's once again, it's a simple decontamination of the well. It's not terrible. Iron is another one of those that's tied to low pH. It's also just aesthetic. You will start seeing the brown staining, the orange rings in the tub, on the clothing. That's what you see in with high iron levels. It needs to get really high to a level that the water is not even aesthetically drinkable for it to be causing health concerns. So this one's also just purely an aesthetic concern. And then other than that, there's explanations on what each one meets and what each one means. We have our full analysis, and once again, I'll get a Tom Nevers specific appendix added to this, so that we can get that information out. And I think Emily from the Land Council is here. If you have any questions or comments on this.
Question, actually. I don't know who's
Yeah.
Thank you. I guess one of the things I was curious about is if you have any sense with the wells where you did find elevated nitrate levels, if you have any sense of how deep those wells are. In other words, I'm kind of just interested, what part of the aquifer are you starting to see that in, as far as how far down they go? Are they older, shallower wells, or... I mean, I'm not sure if that's something that you've looked at, but it kind of just makes me wonder. And obviously, depending on where in the island it is, it might vary as well. But
It's not something we specifically looked at for this, but it is information we do have in the well completion reports. But Nantucket wells, for example, are much shallower than the Nantucket Harbor watershed wells. But it's something that we can look into.
Yeah,
and
you could
There are
put
some
that.
wells, I've been a plumber my whole life, some wells you can, out in Poplis, you can go down 90 to 100 feet before you even hit water.
yeah.
Where I am at Tom Nevers, most of the wells before you hit water around 40 to 50 feet. And then they try to get between 14 or 20 feet of water in the well. But it varies in different parts of the island. Nantucket is very shallow. We used to have years ago, we had a guy in, we'd go out, he had a stainless steel point, and we just had to move his well up 6 inches. And it was good. Then he'd call you, we just go up and move it up and down like that. That's how the water table varied out there. But like I say, in Poplis, you can get down 100 feet.
Or more.
Yeah. Or more, yeah.
I have an intern for the whole year now. That's something we can start looking into, pulling the file, getting it from the well completion report on how deep that well is. It's definitely tedious work, but it's worthwhile. It's actually a great point. It's a great question.
yeah, I mean, I think over time, as you're monitoring the results for this and see maybe changes in where the nitrate levels are in exceedance, and it just might be interesting to get a sense of whether that's really just the upper layer of the aquifer or if you're starting to see that farther down.
It's an excellent point. And when we've seen nitrate exceedances, and they've asked us, one of the things we do tell them is to talk to their well driller, because sometimes you can just put the filter, but if they want to look at exactly the point Jim just made about just moving the pump, because sometimes it's just the layer in which they're pulling water from. Especially now with sea level rise, those layers are moving. So even if it is just the 6 inches, you might be going from 10 milligrams per liter to 3, just in exactly the same well. So it's worthwhile getting that information. Thank you.
Thanks.
Of the 379 wells,
Yes.
what's the percentage of total wells that you actually have data from, of the whole island?
About 10% from the whole island. We estimate approximately, so there's approximately 6,000 wells on the island, but not all of them are drinking water.
Could all be small sample size.
This can all be from small. It's not a represents,
Not powered very,
not yet, not yet.
so.
It's gonna get better.
Yeah.
It's gonna get better, but we have to take this with a little bit of
Yes,
salt.
yes, absolutely, with a little bit of salt. Absolutely,
It's a marvelous start, and it's something we've needed to do for a long time.
Yeah.
It'll get better every year. but
yes. Yeah, the first
that's a
part,
little cautious.
the first part of all of it, of any sort of study, is collecting the data.
Yep.
You know, once you have the data, you can start working with it. We didn't have this data, so this is the first time we have.
It's nice, they did a nice job on the
Yeah.
the work.
Yes, Sky did an excellent work on this. She did a bulk of all of this between two interns. You may remember my previous intern, Amelia Murphy, who's now at McGill,
Yeah,
um,
good for her.
and Sky Flag, who is at Nantucket High School. Both of them were high school interns, and this is the level of work that they crank out. I've seen, honestly, and I'm hopefully somebody from the school committee is watching. The interns I have had from the high school here, 3 now. I had Amelia Murphy, Sky Flag, and Patty Raghavin's daughter, Irina Raghavin. The level of work that they have turned is comparable to most of the college students I've ever worked with. It's been really impressive.
We will continue to have.
And we will continue to have interns. Thanks a lot, actually, to, she's not here, but Helene has been a real advocate for the community association to fund the intern program. So it's fully funded by a grant.
And in terms of increasing that 10% testing sample size, what can we do, or what are we doing to increase that?
So the first step that we're doing right now is actually getting in contact with the caretaking companies. So one of the things is the larger caretaking companies, all the way down to the individual person who is doing caretaking, trying to collect information on who they are, so that we can standardize information out to them. Mainly because we want to see septic systems tested every 2 years, as well as the well water tested every 2 years. So with a septic inspection, which is recommended at the 2-year interval. And if you're in the harbor watershed, you're already required to do it every 5 years anyway. So might as well get it done. So once we can get information to them out and let the caretakers know that this is actually a regulation and this is required. Properties like Mainstay have already expressed interest to us of getting all of their properties tested. So they're already getting water tests, sample kits from us. And that's 37 properties right off the top.
The samples that we have,
Mhm.
do we ask if they're year-round or seasonal? Do
No,
know?
we do not.
We don't?
No.
Okay.
But it is a parameter we can ask.
Oh, yeah, I think that would be interesting.
Mhm.
And helpful in terms of targeting who we need to target in order to get more samples.
Absolutely. So I've already spoken to one of the people who works for Nichols and David, and he gave me the contact information for the primaries there at Nichols and David. That's approximately 120 properties. So we would be able to get good information once we start doing the outreach to them, and then from there we can also get. It's really expensive to mail things out to everyone, so what we're trying to do is get it through email addresses at first before we move to a mailing campaign.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
it might be great if you could put an ad in the paper to all property managements,
Absolutely.
caretaking people, to recommend to all, I mean, you'd be amazed how many, between me and the guy I work with, we get about 65
So
people.
that's perfect.
And if you just put an ad to all caretakers, property management, tell your people that have the water tested if they have water, and the septic system tested, and the well and everything at the same time,
Absolutely. I can work with our outreach coordinator to get that. That's a great
I've
point.
already talked to all my people, so I'm just starting right now, doing it all.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll work with our outreach coordinator to get something in the newspaper for that. Because right now they're still active. So
I don't know if it's possible, but Emily's question just makes wonder if there's any other information that you're collecting that would be helpful for Jeff, or, I think from the select board's consideration of, things we need to do to protect not just public health, but wetlands and drinking water and
Yeah.
things like that from the natural resources point of view.
Jeff and I are in constant communication. So I've let him know about some of this work, and I don't know if he's seen this report yet. This is the first time we've pushed it out. So I'll get this over to him and see what comments he has and what sort of information we can glean from our end. It's also going to help a lot when we co-locate,
Yeah.
since he's going to be right down the hall. Natural resources and the health department work very much hand in hand on a lot of things. He and I have been looking into a potential bylaw as well for certain wetlands protection. Some of the development that we've been seeing has been happening within some of the buffer zones, and we don't always see all the permit applications, which is becoming an issue. So we're looking into ways, even bioretention areas. Bioretention would be a huge help, mainly because it filters a lot of the runoff from development through the organic layer and the A layer of the soil, which right now, when you put in a storm scepter system, it's below that. So it leaches straight into the C layer of the soil, which goes right into the groundwater. If we can get it through a bioretention, kind of like a small maintained wetland, Jeff and I have been talking about this, it decontaminates so much. And they've already been seeing that even grass, regular high grass, is effective at removing the pharmaceuticals and oils and things. High concentration of oil going through will kill off some of the most of the grass. But the small concentrations that you see in runoff, it can actually absorb some of that because it's a regular hydrocarbon. It's a pure hydrocarbon.
And you said higher grasses and unmown?
Yeah, just regular high grasses. It's what there's some of the data starting to show. Some of the reports Jeff showed me. Who was it? His first name is Chris. He wrote the group that did Chris Horsley.
Oh yeah.
Horsley. When we were looking into applying for a joint grant to do a bioretention area in the parking lot behind 37 Washington Street, we got denied that grant, but it was one of the applications. One of the peer-reviewed journal articles that was in that was this journal article I was saying, where it's a regular high grass has organic uptake, a significant organic uptake from runoff, more than expected.
So what they have one between the steamship and the High Line when you cut through. That's a retention.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're trying to see those.
Hyannis.
Yeah, when you cut through.
That looks like a well done bioretention area.
That's exactly what they have. The little walkway that goes right next to it through their, what is that? Their maritime museum right there. That's exactly it. And they actually have the little placard explaining what it is that they're doing. That would be very helpful here on Nantucket as well.
Yeah, especially, one of the things that I see all the time is that, again, that 100 to 50 foot, and with a lot of the development, just looking at areas of unmown lawn, if you're in that buffer protecting the wetlands, could be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thank you.
Okay, great. Any board member updates or concerns?
I have just a question. Are we going to be discussing the haulers regulations?
Yes. So Graham at the DPW is looking to redo some of the haulers regulations, and she actually has a meeting set. I believe it's next week. Just for the staff meeting. I don't know if you're part of that working group. I believe you are, but I'll confirm. But we are looking at redoing some of the hauler regs. In case some of you didn't know, we have the waste hauler regulations are enforced by the Board of Health or by the Health Department, but they're actually a select board regulation. So we're looking into what sort of changes and how to streamline that work. And because when it was written, recycling wasn't anywhere near what it was today. We didn't have the composter. We didn't have the digester. It was a completely different operation. So it's time to update that regulation. So yes, we are looking into it.
I didn't realize they were that old. So it really is.
They're pretty old. They were put in shortly after the biodegradable regulation, and the biodegradable bylaw was 1988. So it's the Board of Health was the select board at the time, and the select board was also the Board of Public Works. So the select board, or the board at the time was the Board of Selectmen, was the Board of Health, was the Board of Public Works, was the Sewer Commissioners, was also the Mosquito Control Commission, was also the... It was almost every single board.
Thought we had a lot to do now, but.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
absolutely.
Oh, so that'll be sometime in the next couple months?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then it will most likely, if anything, if we see it as the Board of Health here, it'll be more for comments, kind of like the marijuana growing, because it's a select board regulation. So you'll more likely see it before we see it here as part of the health board. You'll see it more as a select board member first.
Thank you.
I got one
Yes, sir.
on Malcolm's behalf. Guess. S-Mass.
Oh boy, S-Mast, our friends.
I was gonna.
Right now, it's we have another message out. We sent. I checked with Jeff today before this meeting. He hasn't heard anything, and he is definitely not happy. Probably about as unhappy as you are right now about it. We have another message to Brian and Ed Eichner. I know Michael Delaney, the consultant who's working on the water quality lab, was also thinking of just taking a drive down there and asking about this because it's part of his work too. He needs that report before he can finish his work. So I think it's harder to give a runaround to somebody to their face than it is to an email. So we'll see if Mike was successful.
Thought I'd just
And we
ask.
know that the hearing is scheduled for September. So it's very frustrating having to work with a group that has a proprietary stranglehold on this.
But let me ask you, how long can we deal with this? It's getting out of hand. It's a little
Agreed.
ridiculous.
It's very ridiculous to the point that we have seriously considered pursuing a breach of contract.
Have we said that to them?
I don't know if we said it to them directly, but I know Jeff has mentioned it to Libby. So town council is aware about this issue. And if I don't know exactly what the deadline that was set was. I'll have to follow up on that again. I've been out for the last 2 weeks, but I'll connect with Jeff to see when the deadline was. If they exceed that deadline, then it might be time to pursue it.
Wouldn't it even carry a little bit more weight if like town council made the call?
That's exactly where we're going. That's exactly where town council would contact them saying this would be a breach. If you do not respond, this is a breach of contract. And
Right.
that's exactly where we're going.
Get some action.
That would get response.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Anything else, Jim? No? You good?
Okay.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
thank you.